So I guess I didn't present myself because I figured everybody knew me, but that's probably not true. Golda Tradunsky, I am a palliative care physician. I've been doing palliative care for over 25 years now. I work at a small hospital, Mount Sinai Hospital, that has turned into a bigger thing as we're now part of the CIUS Centre-Ouest de Montréal. And I'm also program director at McGill for the education part. I'm very pleased to be here today as the chair of the scientific committee. We, the scientific committee, were a very multidisciplinary group of people trying to put together a CPD day for you. So we've got representatives from nursing, pharmacy, physicians from tertiary care hospitals, but also community hospitals, and I'm ever so grateful for all of their input. But never mind the input of previous participants to our CPD Day that have fed us with ideas of what it is that you might need, want to hear about. So I am hoping that today will be one where everybody will get something that they wanted to get out of this day. And of course, again, very multidisciplinary because we in palliative care work as teams of people from all kinds of different backgrounds, and I think that's what makes this kind of palliative medicine so rich. So I am now going to ask Bessie, our Master of Ceremony, to come up, but Bessie Bitsas, first of all, I'll present her. She's an Associate Nursing Director of our CIUS at West Central Montreal. I guess I'll translate it. She is overseeing palliative care services of the CIUS, and she works with the community partners to optimize patient trajectories and care. She, I don't know how she managed to juggle everything, but I knew Bessie as head nurse at the Jewish General Hospital, and I didn't realize she was also working on her PhD. But anyway, she's moved on, and it's quite wonderful to have her as our MC every time we do this CPD Day. So not only she is the Associate Nursing Director, but she's also working with the Ingram School of Nursing at McGill. She's Director of Education for the Canadian Palliative Care Nursing Association, and today she's our MC, and so thank you very much, Bessie. Come on down.
For those of you who are part of Palliative Care McGill, what Golda didn't mention is I'm a very bad bowler. When we have our bowling competition, I'm always, actually that's not true, we often win, but it has nothing to do with me. I bring along my husband, who's a very good bowler. Anyways, I just wanted to say bienvenue. On est vraiment contente que vous êtes ici parmi nous, pour ceux celles qui sont dans la salle avec nous, puis aussi les gens qui sont en ligne de partout du Canada. C'est vraiment incroyable qu'on est capable de nous rejoindre ici pour avoir une journée qui va être vraiment pleine d'inspiration, d'information, puis beaucoup d'échanges. So I'm so happy to see so many familiar faces, to see familiar names online as well, and to see new people. So we are looking forward to getting to know all of you. So let's get this show started. Thank you, Golda, first of all, who has been a pillar of this event over the many years that we've done it, and is chair of our scientific planning committee, as she mentioned, and is really, I would say, the spearhead of the day. So thank you. It's always a pleasure working with you. So we're going to get through some boring little business, but we do have to declare our conflicts of interests or otherwise. So I'm just going to run through these slides for you. They're important for accreditation credits. So we have Dr. Golda, Dr. Sanders. So these are all members of our scientific planning committee, some of whom are present, some of whom unfortunately couldn't be here today. I'm actually going to have to change this. I didn't realize that I need to put that I'm the Director of Education of the Canadian Nurses Palliative Care Association, so this will be modified so we keep everything kosher. And I also want to let you know that we're very fortunate that this program has received educational grants from these various funding organizations. So AbbVie, Cedars Cancer Foundation, Super Sublime, the Rossi Cancer Network, Merck, and Amylyx. So we're very grateful for their generous support. Mitigation of potential bias, I think I have to read this, so I will. In accordance with the national standard, Standard 3.2, declare the strategies discussed by the Scientific Planning Committee to manage or mitigate the identified potential sources of bias prior to or during the CPD activity. So we have our potential conflicts of interest for every member of the Scientific Planning Committee listed in writing at the start of the presentation, so we did that. All speakers will disclose potential conflicts of interest in writing and verbally at the start of their presentation, please. The chair is responsible for reviewing all content prior to the presentation, so we know that Dr. Trzynski did this. And the chair also has reviewed all the conflict of interest forms for the Scientific Planning Committee and the speakers, and is thus fully informed as to their status. And she is, even with my little mistake. So we have some very specific but broad learning objectives for the overall day. And we're really hoping that by the end of the day, you're going to be able to come away feeling that you will be able to provide improved support to patients and families through meaning-making and spiritual needs, that you will have the capacity to communicate more effectively with distressed patients and family members, that you will be able to identify non-pharmacological methods to address suffering, that you can leverage different community support models to assist caregivers, that you can assess the role of psychedelics at the end of life, summarize key considerations in end-stage dementia, including ethical issues and clinical management, that you will be able to outline the care of patients with end-stage neurodegenerative illnesses, and describe methods to practice self-compassion and self-care. So you can see that we have attempted to cover a broad range of topics. I know that our speakers are definitely going to be able to deliver, so I'm confident that you will be able to come away from today feeling that you're able to check all of those boxes. So we're very excited about that. So before we begin with our first presentation, I just want to remind you of a few little housekeeping issues. First, if you are in the room, please keep your cell phones, iPads, pagers, if anyone still has a pager. Everything is on silent, please. For those of you online, I think your mics are muted on our end, so I don't think that'll be an issue. After every session, you will be provided with an evaluation form. So for those of you who are online, they will be dropped into the appropriate section. And for those of you in the room, you will have received the link to the evaluation forms also in the Zoom link. And we are really encouraging you to please, please, please provide your feedback after every session. It is very important for us as we plan subsequent days. So we really take that feedback very seriously. And I'll be repeating this. You're going to get tired of me saying this by the end of the day. But I will keep reminding you to do that. The other thing is for questions. For those of you in the room, it's really important that you, when you have a question, you will be asked to use the microphone. And that is so that our colleagues on Zoom can hear your questions, so that they're fully part of this conversation. And for those of you online, I would ask that you please put your questions in the chat, and I will be managing the chat when it's time for the question and answer period. I would also ask you, please don't put anything in the chat that is not a question. So I know you would probably want to share how wonderful the talk is and how inspiring, and that's wonderful. Put that in your evaluation form because I'm afraid I'm going to get lost in the chat. So that's it for now. For our speakers in the room, I will be sitting right there and I will be manning the time. So if you see me waving frantically, it's because you need to stop. So hopefully that won't happen. But we're going to get started. And our first presenter, I'm really excited to present Virginia Lee, who's going to be speaking to us about meaning making in serious illness, Part A, Patients and Families. Virginia has a prior background in psychology and obtained her MSA, so her Master's of Science Applied, and her PhD degrees in nursing from McGill University. She completed her postdoctoral work at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York and at the Nursing Knowledge Translation Center at the University of Manitoba. She has dedicated 30 years to the field of oncology nursing and psychosocial oncology research. And now, as the current manager for the supportive and palliative care programs and services and director of Cedars Can Support, she is absolutely in her element to recognize and bring together the most up-to-date, innovative, and evidence-informed programs and services to promote reflection, growth, and well-being for patients and their families during difficult life transitions. So please join me in welcoming Virginia Lee.
This over a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Can you hear me if I'm speaking like this? Okay, great. Thank you for joining in person, and good morning to everybody online. I guess I was asked to present. I'm very honored to be here to present on some of the work that I've done in meaning making, and also to bring you up to date about the meaning making research. As in the introduction, thank you, Bessie, for the introduction. I did my Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center postdoc there with William Breitbart, and for those of you who know, he's a renowned psychiatrist for his work on meaning-centered psychotherapy and psycho-oncology. And during my postdoc, I had the pleasure of doing some rounds with him. And I wanted to share with you a short brief, the first patient that we actually saw on rounds with him. And I remember, I guess I have to declare my conflicts of interest first. I'm an MUHC employee, and I work for Cedars Can Support. And at the end of this presentation, participants will be able to outline how we help patients and families make meaning, evaluate research and experience regarding meaning making, and indicate key aspects of caring for patients and families. So these are the competencies that we'll be addressing. And here I can start my little case study about my rounds with Dr. William Breitbart. So this was the first patient we went to see together, and it was a couple of things struck out to me because it was quite surprising. So he received a consult to see a 34-year-old woman with ovarian cancer who was admitted for quite a lengthy hospitalization. All we know is that she was withdrawn, she's not coping well, she's depressed, please assess. So Dr. Breitbart and I, we knocked on the door. We asked permission to enter. It was a double room separated by a curtain. It was morning, but the room was pitch black. And no one was in the bed. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I saw a woman sitting at the far end, sitting in a chair, motionless, blanket across her legs. And Dr. Breitbart introduced who we are and started to ask a few questions. And she would answer in one word: not engaging, monotone, flat affect, no eye contact. There was a lot of silence in the room. And then Dr. Breitbart pointed to a picture on the side of her bedside table. And he noticed that there was this beautiful woman dressed in a beautiful gown with a violin in that picture. And he asked if that was her and if she played the violin. And she said yes. And that was the first time she looked up and looked at us. And then, I'm not musical, but Dr. Breitbart is, so he started sharing about music. And then something shifted in that room, and they started to talk. And we found out she was a violinist. The orchestra she was in, she was supposed to go on tour, and that was when she was diagnosed. Her life stopped. She's been hospitalized since then. She hasn't played her violin for weeks, and she misses her 3-year-old son that she used to play music together. So when Dr. Breitbart asked if she would like to bring the violin into the hospital, she looked at him incredulously and said she didn't know that was allowed. And then she started crying. She was apologetic about crying. She was embarrassed, and then she thanked us. And when we left the room, we stood outside her door to debrief a bit, and it was a great feeling of profound connection with a patient who was really non-communicative and who was really concerned about her deep state of demoralization. The surprising thing was that when I looked at my watch, I thought it felt much longer than 10 minutes. And then the door opened, and this man walked out, and then he was crying. And it was a housekeeping staff who was on the other side of the curtain, and he thanked Dr. Breitbart because he was there to listen throughout the whole conversation, and he said that was really beautiful, and he heard everything, but he didn't want to interrupt the flow, but it was just so impactful, and I wanted to share that with you because it stood with me, it stuck with me, and I share that story because it was such a simple yet impactful intervention to know the person, and it was a turning point to get to know this person. So patients are in the hospital when we see them for maybe 15 minutes in ambulatory, 1 hour maybe a little bit longer, depending on how long their wait time is. They need to cope with the illness the other 23 hours or 18 hours of the day when they return home. They have to think about how illness changes the rest of their life, their goals, their expectations for the future. So serious illness leaves people in a state of limbo, a state of liminality, that feels unsettling, uncomfortable, frankly surreal. And serious illness stops people in their tracks. I think you all know this and have experienced this with your patients. Patients need to take stock of their life when serious illness or serious adversity or life-limiting illness changes their life. So serious illness are often the catalyst for a search for meaning. And it's thought to be a vital component of negotiating traumatic life experiences. So why is a sense of meaning so important? Meaning making is basically how we all understand and make sense of the life that we're living. It's something that we all understand and can relate to. It changes who we are, who we think we are, our relationships with other people, how we see ourselves within the grander scheme of things, within the grander universe. And in fact, now, since the 1980s, the literature and research has just exploded. Hundreds of thousands of research has been published since the field of psychosocial oncology was born in the 1980s with, oh my God, I'm blanking on the name. So we just have to type in meaning making on the search engine. You'll see thousands of titles pop up. You'll see titles across patient populations. Literature is mostly on cancer patients, other serious life-limiting conditions like cardiac disease, neurodegenerative disease, HIV, other traumatic pivotal life events, whether expected or not, natural disasters. Even recently, many titles have been studied, have been published about the impact of COVID on how we see life and how we changed as a result of COVID. Studies are across a lifespan, across the illness trajectory from newly diagnosed to end of life. Meaning-making transcends cultures, right across North America, Europe, Asia, and meaning-making transcends time. So really, you can see why meaning-making research is so relatable and studied now. It's not a new concept. I'm not sure why my time across there didn't show up, but it's not a new concept. Writings from the existential philosophers have started from the 1800s with Sartre and Tillich and Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, and then there's a movement of existential therapists starting in the 1940s with Dr. Viktor Frankl. There's Dr. Yalom, Breitbart. So there's a whole list of mostly psychotherapists, psychiatrists who have studied the existential impact of serious life-limiting illness on people's lives and how they understand it. At the same time as the psycho-oncology movement started in 1980s, the social scientists in psychology, nursing, social work also began to study meaning-making in earnest across different patient populations. And so that started off with a lot of individual studies, a lot of qualitative studies. Then that expanded into as we got to understand what meaning-making was with the qualitative research, that expanded into meaning-making interventions, which I'll be getting into a little bit later. And then we have randomized controlled trials. Then we started having systematic reviews to compile and understand. And now we have meta-analyses on the study of research on meaning-making. So the meta-analyses basically show that there's a large effect size of meaning-making interventions for positive meaning in life immediately post-intervention. And that's usually within the first month after receiving the intervention. That decreases over time to a medium effect size post-intervention, maybe 3 months or 6 months later. And then others, the effect size for psychopathology is more moderate, like it's more moderate, 0.47, so outcomes like self-efficacy, which are hard to measure. So that's all I'll talk about the research that has evolved over time, and it's going to continue as we see in the literature. What I wanted to share with you now is what exactly do we mean by meaning making? Or what does it mean when a person has meaning in life? Like food, water, air, having a sense of life is considered a basic fundamental human need. Without having this sense of meaning in life, there's no drive, there's no will to live. This is a basic fundamental assumption. The issue is that meaning in life is not always articulated, it's implicit. When life is going well, there's no need to examine it. Without it, studies show that there is a state of demoralization. Patients can go into a profound state of despair, a state of suffering without meaning, and it's been associated with anxiety, depression, a loss of dignity, hopelessness, desire for hastened death, suicidal ideation. So having a sense of meaning has been shown to provide a buffer to a lot of the adversities that are associated with living with advanced illness or being confronted with one's mortality as a result of these adversities. So the take-home message is that meaning in life refers to having a sense of order and purpose. And I'm going to go through some of what that means. We're going to deconstruct what meaning in life means. There's two levels of meaning. There's a global meaning and there's situational meaning. Global meaning is that general orienting system that we use to organize and understand life events. It refers to a set of global core beliefs that's conscious or unconscious, that's accumulated over the course of somebody's life, and that's used to appraise and evaluate situations. So situational meaning is what I think many of us understand as, is the situation that's confronting a person a threat, or is it benign? And if it's a threat, then do we have the sufficient capacity to deal with it? Do we have the capacity to rally resources to manage with it? That's situational meaning. I'm going to go back to global meaning. The global meaning assesses that situational meaning through these beliefs about and world and assumptions. So there's the psychological studies have shown that healthy adjustment means that we basically self-inflate our own capacity for mastery, for control. There's also this ability to think that we have control and mastery allows us to have this sense of predictability, and it allows us to predict and have life goals and plan for the future, short-term or long-term. There's also, within the global meaning, a theory called the world assumptions theory by Ronnie Janoff Bowman. And this is a theory that really addresses three different assumptions. It's about the sense of justice, the extent to which you believe that good things will happen to good people, that if you eat healthy, you don't smoke, you exercise regularly, then all these things should not lead to any adversity. There's an assumption about benevolence, the extent to which you believe people are generally good, altruistic, and kind, trustworthy, and helpful. There's a belief about luck and randomness, the extent to which you believe there are certain things that are out of your control and how much is in your control. So these are things that fall into that global meaning, and it interacts to help people understand the situation that's in front of you. Usually when life is going well, there's no gap in between. Situations can be understood and explained by everything that's within all these global and situational meaning. And that provides you with a sense of order to understand and a sense of purpose to have life goals and meaning in life. So that's the take-home message, is that meaning in life refers to having a sense of order and purpose. When there's a discrepancy, like what happens when there's a serious illness, this creates a distress. There's an incongruency between the global meaning and that situational meaning. And that creates this liminal space, or what is also called the neutral zone. And that's the gap or the crack in this life scheme. And that's where that's the catalyst for a search for meaning. So global meaning, it's a meaning-making model that's provided by Crystal Park. If you're interested in this area, Crystal Park is a person to read up on. So this is just a schema for us to understand what I just kind of very high level talked about. And so meaning-making model by Crystal Park, and that's a lot of the literature refers to this model. So another thing, take-home message, another thing to remember is that all events are neutral. Objects, situations, they don't have a value. They don't have any meaning until somebody assigns it a meaning. And that makes it our superpower, because that becomes modifiable. That becomes what we use in our meaning-making interventions. So we can always reframe. It's a person's choice to accept or stay with their interpretation of what their meaning of the situation is. Meaning-making involves approach-oriented intrapsychic efforts to change one's global beliefs, and that's called accommodation. Or another way to help close this gap is that you can change the meaning of the situation. So the perception of threat can be reduced through a process of assimilation. And some examples of this of assimilation is sometimes we do hear patients say, cancer is the best thing that can happen to me because it allowed me to really understand and be focused in my life. I can remove all the non-essential things in my life and be more focused and be more purposeful and intentional about how I spend my days, who I interact with. So that's reducing the perception of threat, and that's an example of assimilation. An example of accommodation is maybe something that we all lived through after 9/11. Our collective beliefs about the benevolence and kindness, about luck and randomness have changed because of something that happened that was just so out of the ordinary and unexpected. And that changed our global beliefs about how we saw life in general and how the world was supposed to work. That's an example of accommodation. So nothing has meaning until the event is ascribed a meaning by the person. And that allows for a lot of flexibility. And that liminal space, this becomes a healing third space. And this is a concept that we borrowed from architecture. It's a third space where it's neither your home nor the hospital. It's a space that's where a lot of it's a safe space where things like you can offer safety, a pause for reflection. It offers opportunities. It offers permission to experiment and to discover and change and look at those global beliefs that had really determined how we live our life. But we need that space unobstructed by other incoming stimuli to be able to really delve deeper into changing the meaning. And it's scary. It's a really scary place to be in because there's so much uncertainty. So, back to this healing third space, there's a lot of analogies. Leonard Cohen talks about, there's a saying, there's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in. The analogy of an egg cracking for life to be born, a baby chick is born out of the cracked egg. So there's a lot of different metaphors about how things that are broken can be rebuilt. And what I'm now kind of obsessed with is this new obsession with this. I don't know if people are familiar with kintsugi. So this is where broken pieces of pottery are repaired with glue that's dusted with gold powder to render a beautiful work and a piece of art. So this is a 15th century Japanese art form that treats breakage as part of the history of that object. And it highlights the cracks, the repairs, the suffering, the events of the life of that object. And that becomes something to be acknowledged, not it's something to be disguised. It's not something that to be embarrassed about, but it becomes who the person is or the object is. It becomes a history to be, and a history and a symbol of resilience. So this is something that is really beautiful, and I thought that was a great analogy to how we can use that third space and repair a broken life scheme. This is a cluster of origami masks that was on display at the Cedars Cancer Center as part of the Us Connecting Through Art Gallery. It invites patients and families and healthcare providers to submit artwork to connect with other patients without having to speak. And I thought this is another perfect metaphor that for the way that we interact with patients and in our work sometimes, or patients when they come in to receive treatment. How well do we actually know our patients? How well do we know the meaning that they've ascribed to their illness, the impact of that illness on their life? And consistently in the literature, we see that the development of meaning is gained through relationships and connections with others. The intentional provision of space for these conversations to happen are so impactful and so important. And we learn, and each time we talk, we tell the story again, the patient recounts their history. It's a different way for them to process what they've lived through. And it's a different way that they receive a different perspective from who they talk to, because we ask questions and we engage. So it's a way of really helping to repair that gap in between. We offer different beliefs and understandings, and we offer different ways to heal for them. So these are just samplings of different studies. There's just so many in the literature that narratives and guided conversations and other means to elicit patient and family narratives have been shown to reduce anxiety, depression in patients. It increases their sense of self-efficacy, mastery. It helps them reorder how they used to see life. So all of these ways of talking talking therapies, I guess you could say, that guide a life review and reminiscence therapy and journaling, all of these are offers of opportunities for patients and families to validate, acknowledge what they have lived through, and it validates their sense of self-worth and help them redefine where they're moving towards in the future. So there are many approaches over the years, and I think more will be coming in the future as more clinicians are working and researchers are working to develop these approaches. I'm going to be showing a few that have been standardized and formalized into interventions that have been tested in clinical trials. And so the first one is with Dr. William Breitbart. This is meaning-centered psychotherapy sessions. How am I doing on time? 15?
No, not quite 15, maybe 5 to 10.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So this started out under the leadership of Dr. William Breitbart. It started out as an individual one-to-one therapy, and then it gradually expanded to group therapy. And it's been used in different contexts, not just cancer. Basically, it's 7 sessions if it's individual, 8 sessions with group. And they talk about, each session is, they talk about how you can have different sources of meaning, and and they have conversations about identity, how they explore their self before their cancer, how is their self after the cancer. They talk about experiences and how they identify what are they most proud of, what is their legacy, what would they want to remit or pass on to other people in their lives. So there's 7 different sessions or 8 different sessions that look at these different sources of meaning. And I'm not going to get into it because this is like, you can have a whole session, a week-long session on this. Another example is by a Canadian, Dr. Harvey Chachana. I'm sure many of you know who he is. And this is a patient, it's called dignity therapy. And this is where patients who are facing who are at the end of life, they're facing a life-limiting illness, and they're asked a set of questions. And while they're asking these set of questions that have been evidence-based and tested, it's recorded and transcribed within 24 hours, and that transcription is returned back to the patient or to the family caregiver or the family member as a part of an offering about what they are most proud of. So some of the questions here are, when did you feel most alive? Are there specific things that you would want your family to know about you, and are there particular things you would want them to remember? What are your hopes and dreams for your loved ones? Are there words or perhaps even instructions you would like to offer your family to prepare them for the future? And this creates this permanent record that they offer to the patients. And this is, I think he has several books out now that we can also, if you're interested, you can take a look at. The other one, and actually I think they all work together. Gary Rodin is another psychiatrist in University of Toronto. And this is a shorter session, 3 to 6 sessions over 3 to 6 months. And this is another brief manualized psychotherapy intervention to treat, specifically to treat and prevent depression and distress. And they focus on different domains: symptom management, communication with healthcare providers, changes in the self and relationship with close others, spiritual well-being, and they really focus on mortality. This is a lifeline exercise that I created, that I developed as part of my PhD, and this was based on, I'm not a psychotherapist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, so I created this based on my nursing practice, on the McGill model of nursing and strength-based nursing. And also I brought in cognitive processing theory, post-traumatic distress theory. And so basically what I do with this is that it's a guided storytelling with patients. It's 3 sessions. 1 hour each session, and I basically give the patient a blank piece of paper. I draw a line on that sheet of paper, and that's supposed to represent their lifeline, and the birth to the end of their life. And I ask them to draw a circle to represent who they are as a whole self, where they see themselves on the line. A lot of what I've seen in my studies is that a lot of people put it in the middle. Some people put it in closer to the end, so that the threat of mortality is much more poignant. And then there are some people who put it at the very beginning, who suggest that they already made a lot of this meaning search on their own. And then we talk about the present, what led to their discovery of the cancer, who did they tell. We really went in depth, and we talked about the present. I'm listening for their core beliefs, their assumptions, what guided their behaviors. I'm listening for what they can control, what they can't control, and I reflect back to them. The second session is more of a life review, and I ask people to highlight pivotal life events, good or bad, that had happened to them that stand out in their mind, and we start to write these down onto the line. And then I'm listening to each of those stories. I listen for strengths. What would they do over again? What did they learn? And what I try to reinforce is that these events were just as unpredictable, uncertain, not within their control as their current stressor that they're facing. But somehow they were still able to master and build a sense of efficacy and traverse through it and build that sense of resilience and live through it to talk about it. And so armed with that sense of resilience, then I'm able to focus on the future, which is the scariest part about the uncertainty of living and facing your mortality. But having that more close at hand, their sense of self-efficacy, they're now able to face those fears and uncertainties and goals that need to change, and face the future. So that's the meaning-making intervention from a nursing perspective. So there are a lot of challenges to these standardized sessions. They're mostly research grant funded. They may or may not be sustained into routine care. Training personnel to provide the information, having the space, having the commitment from patients to come to 7 or 8 sessions, the travel, the integration into routine care. There's a lot of different barriers and challenges to implementing these meaning-making interventions into clinical practice. Thankfully, there are other ways to facilitate meaning-making, and there's hope that meaning-making is not only facilitated by these standardized group or individual sessions with a psychiatrist or a trained personnel. We have complementary therapies in meaning-making, and music therapy, mindfulness, meditation, massage, yoga. These allow patients to step back from the cognitive processing that is really in-depth and stressful sometimes. This is really hard work. So these have a role in terms of offering respite from that intense cognitive and emotional processing. When they're ready again, then there's more of the life review and the reminiscence and the cognitive existential art therapy, bibliotherapy. These interventions allow guidance and structure to actually approach the hard work of meaning-making. So to close, meaning-making is really a paradox. Everything has no meaning, and yet everything has a meaning. And it's up to us as healthcare providers to actually search for that meaning with patients. And I wanted to, do I have time to share a personal story? And I really tried to, do I have time? Very quickly? Okay. I wasn't, to be honest, I wasn't sure if I should share or not, but I started 20 years ago, maybe 25, 30 years ago, to research this phenomenon of meaning-making. And I wondered whether meaning-making was really possible for people with less cognitive capacity, because a lot of those interventions in exclusion criteria was psychopathology, or low cognitive capacity, psychiatric illness. That was always an exclusion criteria. So now there's a lot more research that is coming on that has been published about meaning-making with people with dementia and other types of neurodegenerative, neurocognitive diseases. And what I've learned is that everyday activities for this patient population that we usually take for granted, that takes on so much greater significance. And it's that continuity that they're used to that becomes their lifeline. That's their sense of order. So my mother suffers from advanced dementia, and she's forgotten how to chew, she's forgotten how to speak, her language has declined to the point where she can't keep a conversation. And sometimes she doesn't recognize me. And recently, so I attended a nursing conference, and there was this reflection room, and there's you can take a look at the website. I really discovered this by chance. It was hidden away from the main conference center. And here they offer these cards for participants to write their reflections about serious illness and how it, and their thoughts about death and dying and how it impacted their life trajectory. And I started, and people leave it there in that room for connection. So I started reading. I usually don't participate in these things. I should, but I don't. But for some reason I did for this one. I wrote my reflection, and I discovered that upon writing, I was inspired to, and I recognized that I noticed my mother's only 2 words when I go visit is when we walk. She says, she doesn't speak English very much, and she always says, she doesn't say this is, she says, my daughter, to anyone that we pass by. And I recognized that before it was just kind of embarrassing, and it was quite repetitive, but now, as I was starting to write in this reflection room, I realized that this is her meaning in life. She still has meaning in life, and that's her family. I'm gonna get... So, okay. So to answer my question from 20 years ago, yes, people with diminished capacity for cognition, they can have meaning. And yes, everyone with an understanding of their life, it might look different, but there are clues everywhere, and we just have to look. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Virginia. I'm happy that we gave you the time to share that story because it's beautiful and we appreciate you sharing. And it's very important, too. I think the messaging there is really important. We have only a couple of minutes, but I would invite anyone who's online, if you have a question for Virginia, to type it in. And if there's anyone in the room who has a question, just put your hand up and I'm going to pass you the microphone. Oh, I should manage the chat too. Okay, well, if there aren't any questions right now, hold on one second, we have a question.
So I love the idea of being able to help people, especially when they have existential distress. My concern always is who is going to have the time to do this, and will we have the resources, financial, hire someone, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that we can potentially, as all of the different healthcare providers that we are, sort of break it down and maybe without having to do tons of extra education and without having a particular designated person to do this, like all of us do this on the team?
I think all of us are doing some aspect of meaning making when we talk to our patients about who they are and what impact has it been like when they return home. I think those kind of conversations, it's everyday conversations. I think when we have this meaning making model now to frame our everyday conversations, it takes on a different meaning. It helps, but we have to connect the dots for patients. So we can have these conversations, but then we can always bring it back to how is this impacting your life before this illness, and how does that allow you to continue to approach what is and search for what is most meaningful for you. I think we all are, to a certain extent, making meaning with our patients when we talk to them and see them as a person and not just the illness. Everyday conversations, you can, even jewelry, you start a conversation, oh, that's a really unique piece of jewelry. That becomes a story, and then we find out what is important to them, a book that they're reading. Why did you choose that book? And, you can connect the dots for someone to help them and identify what is meaningful in their life. And that doesn't cost anything. That's free.
Thank you, Virginia. In the chat you have, thank you for the wonderful presentation, sincere thanks for your vulnerability and sharing your personal story, and more thanks are coming in, so it was very appreciated. There's also a question about having PowerPoint slides. I don't know what we're doing about that.
For all those people who have signed up to be here today, whether virtually or in person, there will be access to the entire today's sessions online, and you will be getting a link, a McGill YouTube access to the presentations.
Thank you, and we have time for one more question.
I'm very lucky. I don't know if this is on, though.
It's on.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Virginia, for that really, really deep and insightful talk. It really strikes me that a lot more people are actually trying to apply meaning-making interventions in their practice, and simultaneously the practice of healthcare is increasingly divided amongst many, many, many more caregivers and care providers, and that the challenge is now less getting people to appreciate meaning making and more how do people actually share what they have learned and stimulated in the actual individuals that they're caring for. I find so many people in our team at the JGH and everywhere have clued into little elements, but we haven't had yet the capacity necessarily to sort of merge and link all of our meaning-making interventions together for the people that we're caring for. Do you want to make any comments about that?
I completely agree with that. I think even having conferences like this, we become the advocates. We have to see the value and identify and be role models for our, every time we come to a conference like this, we're kind of preaching to the converted already. So I find that when we come to these conferences, I'll be learning from the other speakers and from other people in the room afterwards. We become the advocates. We learn more from connecting with others, and we become the advocates to teach others when we go back to our respective units and when we work with patients. And we become role models to our students, our trainees. And we can even bring in the theory and say, this is evidence-based. It's not just nice to have these conversations. It's not just idle talk, but it actually has scientific evidence to back it up now. Complementary therapies, it's very difficult to have randomized controlled trials for this. It's difficult to do research with that. But the research is, there's different research models now to study that kind of approach. But we become models, role models, and we have to call it out and link it back to a scientific base. But I agree. I completely agree with you.
Thank you once again, Virginia. So for the second talk this morning, it's a second part of the concept or of meaning-making in serious illness. And this talk is going to focus on spirituality. And I'm really excited to present to you Emma Abman. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Emma is a spiritual care practitioner at the MUHC. She's lived in Ottawa, Halifax, Vermont, and Toronto before coming and living in Montreal in 2021. And she's passionate about philosophy, nature, and the arts, and we are so excited to have you here with us.
Good morning. So my name is Emma Abman. Thank you for the introduction. And Virginia, that was a wonderful presentation. And I'm honored to be here this morning. Thank you for inviting me. So I do not have an affiliation, financial or otherwise, with any for-profit or not-for-profit organizations. At the conclusion of this presentation, participants will be able to describe an overview of spirituality in the context of palliative care, identify the spiritual needs of patients and families at the end of life, and evaluate the role of spiritual care. How does spiritual care help meet these needs? The competencies are expert, collaborator, and health advocate. So what is spirituality? Spirituality can be a tricky word. It means different things to different people. For some, it has a religious connotation, bringing to mind religious traditions and the various relationships we have with them, which can be positive or negative, or perhaps unclear or ambivalent. For others, spirituality means something distinct from religion, something broader and perhaps more nebulous and harder to pin down. Some embrace the term spirituality and connect particular personal beliefs, practices, or experiences with it. They might see their spirituality as the framework of their values, worldview, or life purpose. But for others, the term spirituality brings up a fraught history related to family norms and religious institutions, memories of being dragged to church on Sunday mornings, or parents or grandparents threatening divine retribution for bad behavior, and a difficult struggle for independence and self-determination. Still others have no particular reaction to the term. If you say spirituality to them, they say, "What do you mean?" So what do we mean when we talk about spirituality in the context of palliative care? We mean something very unique, personal, and particular to the individual, something that is lived and expressed in as many different ways as there are people on this planet. At the same time, we mean something that we all share as humans, something that is part of our nature as sentient beings, with the capacity for thoughts, feelings, imagination, and awareness of self and others. Oh, sorry. There was supposed to be an extra slide in there, which would say, spirituality refers to the ways we understand, express, and relate to our experience and identity. So let's get specific about the expressions of spirituality in people's lives. Of course, categories and lists can't fully capture a person's spirituality, which is really a web of interwoven elements. Spirituality is a web of interwoven elements that is always under construction, never finished, never static, continually being spun, even or especially at the end of life. I'm sure you will recognize many of these elements of spirituality as I name them from your work with patients and families, no matter which profession you practice. The first element of spirituality that I want to identify is beliefs and perspectives, how we see ourselves, our world, and what happens to us. This category refers to things like how our patients and families see the nature of life and death, life's purpose, the existence and role of a greater power, religion, science, and views on family, community, and society. Patients may have beliefs about whether their illness is a matter of fate or chance, whether they are subject to divine judgment, and whether absolution or forgiveness is possible, be it divine forgiveness or self-forgiveness. Some patients say, "What happens to me is in God's hands." Others say, "I don't believe in God, I believe in science." Many believe in both. Others don't think in those terms at all, but instead see their lives in relation to their family or their life's work. Then we have rituals, broadly defined as what gives shape and meaning to our lives. This can refer to religious rituals, like receiving the Catholic sacrament of the sick or performing Muslim daily prayers. It can refer to rites of passage. For some people, their wedding or their father's funeral will always be a definitive moment in their lives. Others might focus on cyclical passage in relation to the cyclical passage of time, in relation to gardening seasons or hockey seasons. Some don't feel like themselves unless they have a coffee first thing every morning or wash their faces before going to bed every night. Even small rituals give shape and meaning to people's lives and can provide a supportive framework or scaffolding. Passions are the things people care about most. Often we are most passionate about the people in our lives. Sometimes it's activities, work, pastimes, art, hobbies, or sports. Some people are passionate about places, such as their birthplace, their home, certain landscapes like the woods or the river, or travel destinations. Others are passionate about politics, social causes, or communities of shared ideals. The list goes on. What we love is a big part of who we are and the sustenance of our well-being. Feelings and mental states refer to how we react to our experience. In a palliative setting, we often see patients and families in painful states, such as sadness, despair, anger, fear, anxiety, isolation or loneliness, discouragement, hopelessness, confusion, mistrustfulness, rejection, or grief. We also see joy, happiness, contentedness, confidence, peacefulness, calm, hopefulness, or a sense of belonging, connectedness, relief, acceptance, or gratitude. Often we see several of these at once or in the course of one day. We might think that some feelings are opposed to each other or mutually exclusive, but this notion isn't reflected in people's lived experience. A person can, for example, experience sadness and gratitude at the same time. Feelings and states of mind are like weather, which can be clear, overcast, a mix of sun and clouds. Feelings can roll in and out like storms. Sometimes feelings are like what they say in Nova Scotia. If you don't like the weather, wait 10 minutes, because it changes that quickly. In fact, feelings are much like the weather. They can appear to be the same for days on end, but if you look closely and wait, you will see that they always change. Priorities refers to where we choose to focus, knowing that life is finite. Our priorities might be defined by our passions, the things we care about most, but there can be a reevaluation or reversal at the end of life. Perhaps a person prioritizes work until they become terminally ill, and then they shift their focus to their family or artwork. Maybe they focus on getting all of their affairs in order as a way to reduce the burden on their families after they die. Maybe they devote their waning energy to finishing the book they've been writing, or recording their family history, or returning to their birthplace. Or maybe their priority is to maintain a degree of autonomy or dignity up until they die. Wisdom, loosely defined, is what we have learned about life. Some people have a strong desire to share their wisdom as they near the end of life. This might refer to how they understand illness, suffering, and dying, or how they understand their feelings. They might share how they cope with pain and the uncertainty of where they are headed. Or they might share their wisdom on history, humanity, the future, or the cosmos. Or it might be that they repeat something their mother used to say, some value that has guided them through life, something as simple as always say thank you, or always look people in the eye. Finally, there is the element of legacy, or what we leave behind when we die. It can be crucial for people to reflect on what they have made or changed in the world. It could be that they have children and grandchildren, or that they have formed deep relationships with partners, family, friends, or colleagues. Maybe they consider their work or their possessions to be their legacy. Maybe it's the values that they have shared or modeled in their behavior and passed down to others. A person's legacy can be found in obvious ways that they have left their mark on the world, and in ways that are harder to track. A person's life is like a stone dropped into a pond, causing the water to ripple out in all directions. We can't trace all the ripples created by our lives. All of this has bearing on how a person experiences death and dying. But when we walk into a hospital room and meet a patient or a family member, we meet a whole human being, not a set of categories. What we see and hear from a patient is the intersections and connections between these elements and their current experience. These aspects of a patient's life and identity are in the background. What is happening to them and what we ask of them in the palliative setting may bring them to the foreground, but not necessarily in predictable ways. So what does it mean to care for this complex, variegated, and unique thing, a person's spirituality? What are the spiritual needs of patients and families at the end of life? To be seen and heard. It's so simple and so often repeated, but with good reason. We need people to really look at us and listen to us so that we may be understood. To varying degrees, we feel alone in our experience. No one else knows exactly what it feels like to be us, to be in our position. This aloneness is often exacerbated by serious or terminal illness. We are in uncharted territory, and we might want very much to share what is happening to us. But no one else is living this exact sickness, and no one else is going to die with us the way that we are dying. we may have a profound need to bridge that divide and bring others close to our experience in order to feel less alone. Relief from suffering. As care providers in palliative care, we are all oriented towards relief from suffering. This can be seen from a spiritual perspective. Suffering has many dimensions. When we are suffering, we experience pain or dis-ease on interconnected levels, an interplay of physical sensations, emotional reactions, and beliefs and ideas about how we should or shouldn't feel and what's going to happen to us. In some cases, a terminally ill patient is ready to die. Perhaps they are suffering terribly, and death will bring a welcome end to their suffering. Perhaps they are free of fear about death, whether because their religious or philosophical beliefs provide solace, or because they have a kind of innate fearlessness. Sometimes a patient is ready to die, but their loved ones are not ready for them to die. We've all seen this. In these cases, there can be a need for affirmation of the patient's readiness to die and of their perspective on death. It can be extraordinarily healing on the spiritual level for a person to feel understood and validated in their conviction that their death isn't wrong or bad. Self-determination in collaboration with the healthcare team. I use the word self-determination to capture the need to be ourselves in that hospice or hospital room, to preserve our humanity and identity, the need for autonomy and dignity. In collaboration with the assessments of the healthcare team, we need to formulate our own understanding of what's happening to us, in our own words and according to our own worldview. We need to feel that our decisions are our own, even if they are based on the expertise of our care providers. Patients and families need to understand and come to terms with what is happening in their own way first, and they need the space to do that. Connection, belonging, passage. As a palliative patient or family member, we are undergoing profound changes and facing tremendous loss. If we experience existential despair, it often relates to profound loneliness and the feeling that we are losing our grip on the meaning and worth of our lives. We have a need to retain a sense of connection to others and a sense of belonging to the whole, whether for us that whole is family, community, humanity, or God. We might also need to feel a sense of belonging to place, to feel that we belong here on this palliative care unit or in this hospice. If we are dying or losing our loved one, we also have a need for passage. Quite simply, we need to undergo the change that is happening to us. As a patient, that change is happening in relation to everything that we value and that makes us who we are. Acceptance. Is acceptance a spiritual need? Acceptance certainly aids in well-being. When a patient or family member accepts their situation to a greater extent, their anxiety diminishes, and the energy they were using to fight against the situation is freed up to focus on coping and setting priorities. And without a doubt, it is easier for us as care providers when a patient or family member accepts their situation. We want our patients to suffer less. That often goes hand in hand with acceptance. But does a person need to accept their situation? It's helpful to think of acceptance less as a need than as an outcome. We are each on a path of realization and understanding. All of the interwoven elements of our experience, past and present, are at play. Our path may or may not lead to acceptance or to some degree of acceptance. Some of the obstacles to acceptance may be obvious, and others may be harder to unearth. As care providers, we hope that our care will help lead to greater acceptance, but we can't determine whether or not acceptance will occur. Shorthand, compassion. We might say that the spiritual needs of patients and families at the end of life come down to compassion. We need compassion from others and from ourselves. Compassion is the result of seeing and hearing a person clearly, with care and respect for their unique lived experience, with the aim of reducing their suffering. So how does spiritual care meet the spiritual needs of patients and families. Time and space. The work of a spiritual care practitioner begins with taking time and making space for patients and families who need support. We take time to assess the spirituality and spiritual needs of the patient and family. This requires us to cultivate a scenario in which the person feels free to express themselves. We make space for the person in the sense that we stay open to what they want to tell or show us. We demonstrate to the person that we are not in a hurry, we have no agenda, and we make no assumptions about who they are or what they need. We provide a non-anxious presence. This requires a high degree of self-awareness. We pay attention to our reactions to the patient or family member in order to see the situation clearly and distinguish between our own feelings and what we are picking up from the other person. A non-anxious, receptive presence shows the person that we can witness and withstand their suffering. We can accept it and be with them in it, and we will not reject or abandon them because their suffering is hard to tolerate. Looking and listening. We address that profound need for relief from loneliness, the need to be seen and heard. We are continually communicating, verbally and non-verbally, I see you and I hear you. We look and listen closely in order to provide attunement and accompaniment. We align ourselves with a patient or family member in response to what we see and hear. The way we respond with words and body language shows the person that we are willing to enter into their experience as much as possible and to be with them in it. We come with an attitude of not knowing. What this means is that we take the patient or family member to be the expert on their experience, and we take them as they are. We don't judge them or try to change them from the outside. We don't try to counteract their bad feelings with better feelings. Rather, we make room for the whole range of feelings that they are experiencing and that come and go and change like the weather. If the person experiences some relief, freedom, acceptance, transformation, or letting go, it happens from within them, in a way and on a timeline that we can't force or predict. However, we can foster or facilitate change through compassion and accompaniment, and by shining a light on the sources of strength in a patient or family member. I call this illumination. By asking questions that get to the heart of a person's spirituality and paying close attention to how they respond, we can help a person to see their own inner resources. This can lead to a shift in their perspective, a reorientation towards their situation and their capacity to respond to it. Finally, spiritual care providers facilitate rituals for patients and family members who request things like the sacrament of the sick, for which we need a Catholic priest, an end-of-life ritual, which we construct in collaboration with the patient and family, prayer, the viewing of a body, and other rituals and ceremonies. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Emma. You said quite a bit, and I want to thank you for the beautiful way that you presented so many different elements related to how we can support our patients and our families, and really you did a beautiful job that I'm sure is very comforting and inspiring for people. And I want to just welcome anyone in the room who might have a question to put up their hand or to just walk to the mic, and anyone who is online to type in a question if you'd like. And I'll read it for you.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much. When you spoke about illumination, you said that you would ask questions. Can you give me an example of what kind of questions you would ask the patient?
Sure. I mean, every situation is different. And I like to say that I kind of lead from behind. So, like Virginia was saying, I look carefully and listen carefully and go from where the patient is at, what the patient wants to talk about. But there are so many entry points into discovering a person's values and strengths and beliefs and sources of inner strength. So I'll give you an example. A patient I saw recently expressed his fear of death, a palliative patient at the end of life. He shared his fear of death pretty much right off the bat with me after I introduced myself. And he's someone I had noticed had a lot of visitors. And he was very gracious and welcoming when I came into his hospital room. So I asked him about his fear of death, and he talked about having a kind of lifelong sense of sadness. Like sadness was kind of his go-to emotion. And so when I heard that, I thought about this person who was very gracious and welcoming and had a lot of friends around him. And to me, it was an indication of someone very sensitive, very open to connecting to other people. And so I started to identify those things that I had observed and connect them to what he was expressing about his fear and sadness. And so it kind of sheds light on what I'm noticing in order for the person to see themselves mirrored in me, to see what I'm seeing. And that can be transformative and strengthening or not. I mean, it really depends on the situation. Yeah. But it often leads to very positive results. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We'll have one more question.
More of a comment. Thank you for that. I thought it was very clear and accessible. I don't know if you're an author, but I think it would make for a great book or a great manual for either practitioners or loved ones. I think it would be great content. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Well, now you know what you're going to do for the next little while. Keep yourself busy. Thank you for that comment. And I agree, Emma. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us.